Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do. 2.5 Admins, episode 307. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. Before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is native iNotify in FreeBSD.
Yeah, so this is a story of how Clara developed the iNotify feature for FreeBSD, providing the same interfaces on Linux so that applications that are ported will be able to just work, and solving a customer-specific problem all at the same time.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. Well, the news is just all a bunch of grim AI bollocks that we don't want to talk about, and we've got loads of feedback that we've been meaning to get to from you lot, so that's what we're going to do today. Shadow53 writes, I was listening to episode 293 where you discuss how painful Windows Update is and how Windows makes you reboot but Linux doesn't, except for kernel stuff. I was curious what your thoughts are on distros that use offline updates, like Fedora. Do you think the arguments for offline updates on Linux are sufficient to justify the same in Windows? Is there some other difference that makes it okay on Linux but not Windows?
So to clarify, the offline update concept is basically, instead of installing the update and then rebooting, it does more like what Windows usually actually does, which is stage the update, reboot into a special kind of pre-boot environment where none of the services of the OS are running, and then do all the updating and then reboot properly into the OS. This removes a lot of the problems you can get when you update a binary but haven't restarted it yet, and so on, that you can see under Linux and BSD. And there are some advantages, and mostly reduce complexity with what could go wrong during an upgrade if you're doing it when nothing else is happening on the computer versus when the computer's running and who knows what the user is doing to it while you're installing this update. But being spoiled by having ZFS and it's integrated in the OS like I am, instead of that, what we do with FreeBSD is you can create your new boot environment, update it, and then just reboot to it and not require this reboot into a special mode. You could basically just mount your new root file system in some other directory, apply all the changes you want to it, and then reboot into it with one reboot instead of having to boot into a special mode, then apply the update, overwriting files on your system and dealing with the fact that you want to overwrite them while they're not in use, and then reboot onto it.
That sounds a little bit like the Android-style A/B partitioning, where it updates on the other partition, tries to boot into that. If it fails, then it goes back into the one that you know was working.
That's the way it works on a lot of higher-end commercial routers as well. You've got A/B, so you update the A side of the firmware and try to reboot into it. And if that doesn't work, your original is still there in B untouched, so you boot back to where you were and you can try again. Alan's answer about what FreeBSD does, it's really nice if you can afford to do that, but you have to really be all the way in on not just ZFS is an option for my root file system, but ZFS is going to be my root file system for that approach to work, which obviously isn't really an answer for Fedora, at least not until you get into, variants, like maybe Silverblue might do something like that and could. But you can't do that with mainstream Fedora because mainstream Fedora is a mainstream Linux operating system, and therefore it's not going to be depending on out-of-kernel modules regardless of the license, much less once you get into licensing conflicts and, is Linus going to grab his pitchfork and, come kill us for trying to bundle all this, whatever.
No, but hang on, you could do it with ButterFS, no problem.
Shut up, Joe. With all that said, I'm not angry about the way Fedora does it, but there's a reason for that. Fedora gets it all done in one reboot, for one thing, not, well, maybe we'll make you do this 5 times before you can use your system again, the way Windows Update often does. And it doesn't take for bloody ever to apply the updates the way Windows Update also tends to do. It's usually kind of hard to notice the difference between booting a Fedora system that needs to apply updates and booting one that doesn't, because as one would expect, it just gets on with life in the process and it goes at a reasonable speed. I still don't know what all Microsoft is actually doing in the throes of a Windows Update process, but it's painful. It's clearly the result of decades of unaddressed cruft and technical debt. So it's really not fair to compare a simple offline update system like Fedora's to the Lovecraftian monstrosity that Microsoft saddles Windows users with.
Alex writes, I enjoyed when you talked about power stations. One of you mentioned bringing your own portable power station to someone else's house to charge during outages, which is also an idea I had. Taking the idea a step further, there are options to charge your power station at EV charging sites at much faster rates than you can from a 110 outlet.
So they have a link here to the Anker Solix F3000, which supports charging up to 3.6 kilowatts, which is, much more than you would get out of a normal 110 15 amp circuit that you find in most houses, or even the 20 amp version. And yeah, if you're definitely in the situation where power outages and prolonged outages like that are a frequent thing, or, just live in hurricane country, it definitely seems like a good investment in having, that extra option of I can go somewhere where I can quickly fill up my tank of electrons instead of water and then go home and be able to live for a while.
It's probably also worth noting that, even if your particular power bank doesn't support a J1772 adapter to, take it to an EV charging site, most of these things are designed for either American or European use, and it may be very cheap and easy to just get the adapter to plug it instead of into a 110 outlet, to plug it into a 240 volt outlet, and you will charge not as fast as you would at an EV charging site, but tremendously faster. You would think instinctively that going from 120 to 240, which is really what they are, we still say 110 over here, but it's 120 and 240. Well, obviously that goes twice as fast, right? Well, it's actually more like 2.5 times as fast. The charging is a lot more rapid and more efficient, which is another nice benefit. You also have less line loss when you're charging at 240. So if you have 240 volt outlets like you would use for, say, a dryer, for example, available to you, you might want to look into, what it takes to just get a 240 volt cable for your power bank.
Yeah, it's funny, you North Americans with your comedy low voltage outlets. I mean, 240 is just the standard outlet for me. So yeah, if my Anker thing can take UK voltage, then I would imagine your ones are probably dual voltage or multi-voltage and multi-frequency and everything. I would definitely check that before plugging it into, a 240 outlet. You don't want to fry it.
Yeah, they're regionalized, but some of them do have options for that, or adapter cables. Like here we have a link to the EcoFlow Delta Pro has an actual J1772 adapter to their 50 amp 8-pin connector. I actually have a 30 amp 240 volt twist lock outlet, so different than what you would have for a dryer, but in the basement bedroom of my house that my 6,000 volt amp UPS plugs into to power all the stuff in my rack. And, I was looking at the Anker like F3800, I think it is, where if you get two of them, you can actually have it output 240 volts by using the two inverters and basically replace that old UPS that its batteries are dead now or past their end of life, and replacing them will cost a lot more than getting these newer power banks would.
And you've recently upgraded in your house, right?
Yeah. I started out with the Anker C1000 Gen 2 that we talked about recently, but then over the previous holiday period, they had a sale on where I got a C2000, which is twice as big and has more outlets and so on, and has an RV outlet on it. So you could run a whole RV off the battery pack. So it gives you an option with some adapters to power beefier stuff. But the sale included the expansion pack, which let me add a 2,000 or 3,000 watt hour expansion battery. So basically with the two, the combo I bought gives me 5 kilowatt hours of power, which now sits in my basement and runs all my IT infrastructure. So my home NAS and build server, my router and home assistant and so on machine, and the 10 gigabit switch and the 2.5 gigabit switch that does PoE for all my Wi-Fi adds up to about 500-ish watts. That Anker running in its time of use mode shifts the 6 hours of most expensive power of my day to the cheaper part of the day, and means that if the power goes out, I have a much better runtime than I was ever going to get spending that amount of money on normal UPSs with lead acid batteries. Plus, I get all the control and stats and so on, and it's been very interesting.
Because you got it hooked into Home Assistant.
Yeah, I got it hooked into Home Assistant so I can see everything and control everything. So it knew, hey, there's a thunderstorm coming. I'm going to switch out of time of use mode back to normal UPS mode and charge up the battery so that if the power does go out because of the storm, you're going to have a bunch of power to run off of. Because it turns out today, the time the storm was coming is about the end of my time of use period. It was coming, half an hour before the end of my time of use period. So traditionally, that would be when my battery was at its lowest state because I had used up all the power to run all my IT off the battery and shift my time of use from costing me 20 cents to costing me 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And, if you're in a place that doesn't have 50% nuclear power like I am, and you're paying a lot more than 20 cents a kilowatt hour during on peak, that can suddenly be a very big difference. And not for the Anchor specifically, but I saw that this website called WattCycle makes an adapter for the EcoFlow Delta that plugs into that same port we were talking about earlier that had the EV charging port to basically allow you to use your own expansion battery instead of buying the branded one. So there's people are buying the LifePo golf cart batteries and so on that you can buy really big ones at a cheaper rate than some of these power stations, and then use the right adapter to plug it into the smart power station that has all the nice app and the integrations and so on, but give it all that extra capacity. And suddenly things are getting even more interesting.
The world really has moved on from the days of lead acid, hasn't it?
Not entirely, but I have.
Well, yeah, the world could have.
It should have. It's disturbingly slow to. I am starting to see lithium batteries showing up for in EVs for the small 12-volt battery that they need to start. A lot of people don't realize EVs, even though they have very large drive batteries, that you can't start them off the drive battery. You also need a much smaller 14-volt system because essentially you don't want to just be closing a relay on all of the power available to the big battery in your EV. So you have a much smaller battery that you energize and you use that to get the power going off of the big system. And originally, like for example, in my mom's first and second generation Toyota Priuses, those were still lead acid batteries and they didn't last any longer and they weren't any more reliable. But these days, like for example, both of my EV motorcycles, they have lithium ion 14-volt starter batteries, and they're a lot more reliable. They don't drain as quickly if they're left cold. They're lighter, they're smaller, is much better.
David writes, in episode 289, you talked about using glass-based media for long-term storage. You better make sure the glass being stored is as clean as possible because fungus can eat organic materials or adhesives or many other things on the lens surface. This can easily etch the glass. Camera collectors know this quite well.
That is certainly very true. We do not advocate dumping any storage medium into a mildewy dungeon and left to rot. With that said, this is less of a danger than it sounds like to begin with, because when you're talking about a camera lens, well, once it's etched, it's basically ruined. The way the glass-based storage works, the pits that the lasers are making are internal to the medium. They're not on the surface. So this is a lot more like a dirty CD where you can literally just buff the top of it as long as the interior is intact. It's kind of okay if the surface of it gets yucky because you can just buff it out. Again, this is not something I'm saying, you should definitely plan on just throwing it in your dungeon to collect mildew and get etched and then take a buffer to it. No, that's a bad idea. I'm just saying it's maybe not as dire as it might seem at first.
Yeah, but in previous episodes, we've also talked about when it turns out the masters for a bunch of popular albums were stored on 2 hard drives because they're smart enough not to rely on one, that they locked, in temperature and climate controlled vaults. It's like, yeah, but good luck getting that 30-year-old hard drive to spin again. You just the grease on the bearings is seized up and so on. And so, yeah, you have to factor this type of stuff in when you're talking about storing something for the long term. While you maybe have it climate controlled and so on, we've also seen data centers where cooling breaks down. And how often are you checking this media, making sure that it's still in good shape? And do you have a rotation policy of we're going to, read all this data back, verify it's correct, apply the parity that we had, and write it again in such a way that we're still going to be able to read it in another 30 years. And a lot of times that kind of upkeep is not considered.
And in this case, I think it's worth noting that a reasonable version of that kind of upkeep might be, yeah, we put this stuff in a vault and we bring it out once a decade. run it through the dishwasher, make sure we can still read it, and maybe every 30 years we just make a fresh copy.
Yep.
Personally, I love the idea that you could just run your hard drive through a dishwasher and have it come out nice and shiny new on the other side.
Yes.
I might try that with some of my old DVDs that don't work anymore. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Your DVDs are not glass, Joseph. They're plastic layers, very cheaply sandwiched over foil interior. So no, I wouldn't put those in the dishwasher.
Well, if you're going to, I would be careful because the top side, the label side, is actually where the data is. The data's on the back of that foil. And a scratch on that side will destroy the data for sure. The rest of it's mostly just a polycarbonate disc. So if you're going to do something like that, make sure you're only doing the rough stuff on the side you normally worry about scratching. But it's the label side of your CD and DVD that's actually the one you're most likely to cause irreparable damage to.
Oh no, I might lose my copies of 25-year-old movies that I use DVD shrink to put onto a 4.7 gigabyte disc instead of whatever it was from Blockbuster.
Well, also to be fair, even with traditional optical media like CDs or DVDs, you actually can buff out scratches. There are kits to do that, and they work. That used to be a very common way of repairing damaged like PlayStation CD-ROMs, is you would put them in one of these little kits. They would come with a very fine grit buffing solution, and you put that in like a little thing that you spin by hand, and you literally just spin the disc in there to buff scratches out of the surface. As long as the only issue is scratches or etching in that plastic surface, you can address it that way. Your issue is when you do something that messes up beneath the surface where that foil actually is. So the real danger with putting a CD in the dishwasher is not that you'll screw up that plastic surface, it's that moisture is going to get inside that sandwich and mess up the foil in there.
Will writes, in episode 300, Jim mentioned paying to help support The Guardian. I was wondering about Jim's comment about how they're the only major non-partisan news source he trusts. I agree, I like them and believe they are non-partisan. What are everyone's thoughts about wire services like the Associated Press or Reuters? I thought it was relevant because recently the Associated Press have included a donate button in their app and rarely has a pop-up asking for support. This approach reminds me of how you discussed on your other shows KDE's success at this approach, asking for donations but in a less intrusive manner. Well, let me just say, this was not the only feedback we got about The Guardian. People were amused that you thought The Guardian was non-partisan because it is not non-partisan. It is left-leaning, shall we say, liberal-leaning. It's not like it's nowhere near as bad as American media, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not completely straight down the middle.
There's no such thing as completely straight down the middle. All news is editorial. If it's not editorial, it's not news, it's raw data, and you don't have the time to ingest it, let alone analyze it. So let's just go ahead and clear that one right off the bat. When I say nonpartisan, I mean that they aren't pushing some weird angle for benefit or to appease some particular asshat that's in power. And also, nothing is perfect and everything is relative. As far as, the wire services, the AP and Reuters, I definitely approve of them more than I approve of any of the American news outlets that source their stories from them. But at this point in time, I am deeply wary of anybody that can directly be influenced by the current political administration in my country. I don't think there's anything that the Associated Press or Reuters can do to entirely fix that. I am very thankful for having other news sources that are farther out of the reach of my own government that actually report directly on what's happening in my country, because it's getting less reliable over here. We try not to get too political on the show, but I don't know how else to answer this.
AP got banned from the White House, and it took a judge to overturn that ban. I think that was to do with the Gulf of America fiasco, because they just refused to report facts that were not facts.
That speaks highly of the AP, but it also speaks highly of my wariness, because they did go through that. They have to go through that. And it's going to be a fairly easy policy change to say, you know what, maybe we just make whoever's in charge, I won't name any names, happy for a little while, and it'll make our lives easier. How many news outlets have we seen make exactly that choice in the last couple of decades in this country?
But as for this donate button business, I think, yeah, you've got to be upfront. I mean, if you are not a patron, you will have heard and definitely not skipped through the little pre-roll at the beginning of this episode that asks you to become a patron. I think you've got to ask or you don't get. And yeah, absolutely. The AP and KD and whoever, if you want support from your audience, you have to ask for it and you have to be shameless about that.
Well, and that's the other thing you have to realize about wire services like the Associated Press and Reuters. Until the addition of a donate button from the AP, you weren't their customer. You aren't their customer unless you click that. Their customers are the news outlets that I don't trust at this point. So it's easier for me to trust The Guardian because The Guardian is an actual news outlet that has always been set up to accept money directly from its readers. We are the customers. That relationship is easy to parse and understand. Whereas I'm accustomed to the AP and Reuters, while being more reliable than the end news outlets, I have to be aware that those news outlets are their customers. That's who they expect to get the money from that makes them able to continue doing business.
Yeah, some of it is, as we talked about before, you look at something like Facebook. It's like, you're not paying for it. So you're the product and someone else is the consumer. And the kind of same thing goes here. Like if you're consuming whatever it is, whether it's news or a podcast or some software, if you're not the one paying for it, then the person who is like the person that has more control over what happens. So then if you maybe collectively as a group of people decide to become the people that fund that work, then you get to decide where it goes. And maybe that means it goes in the direction that you would like it to.
The last thing I'll say on the issue of whether or not I should reasonably consider The Guardian to be a relatively nonpartisan news source, a lot of, especially the folks on other sides of any given pond from me may not realize is that at this point in time, Fox News is arguably one of the more moderate news sources in the USA. There are news sources that are far more radically right-wing than Fox News right now, and a lot of Fox News's traditional audience is complaining radically about how they're basically Democrats now at Fox News. I certainly don't agree with that take, but that maybe helps inform some folks as to why I think overseas news is so important to me right now.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Another perk of being a patron is you get to skip the queue, which is what Ralph has done. You convinced me. I'm about to dance with ZFS for the first time on a Ugreen NAS with 8 drives and 64 gigs of RAM, all purchased in October 2025. Phew. Since everything that will be in ZFS is somewhere else as well, I'm not concerned about losing data as much as time. So I've decided to run 4 vdevs as mirrors. That way, when I want more storage, I just have to upgrade 2 drives. My question is, do I run 1 Z pool or 4 separate Z pools, 1 for each mirror?
Typically, you run 1 Z pool with all of your mirrors in it. The reason that you do that is so that you can get the performance advantage of all of your vdevs focused on, whatever random task you happen to be throwing your storage at. There are some exceptions, however. For example, if you have some very latency-sensitive tasks and some more throughput-sensitive tasks, I don't think you would want to have 4 Z pools, but you might potentially want to have 2. You might want to have 1 for the latency-sensitive stuff that that other storage tasks that you're running aren't going to slow down, for example, a database that you expect to have very predictable returns, whereas your bulk file storage, where you just want all the throughput you can get from whatever you throw at it, well, you want that to have as many vdevs as possible.
Yeah, in general, the one of the main points of ZFS is pooled storage, putting all the disks together and then being able to slice it up how you need. And by doing 1 pool instead of 4, you won't have the problem of, I ran out of space on the pool that stores my Linux ISOs, and I have all the space on the pool that stores my family photos. And if you put them all into 1, then you can mix and match and kind of use all the space in whatever way it turns out you need it. And as Jim said, it means when you read and write, it's spreading it across all 8 of your drives. And so especially when reading it back, if a file was written to a pool that's made up of these 4 vdevs, you're going to read from all 8 drives at once and get the most possible performance. Obviously, when writing, you're going to write to all 8, but only the same thing to each pair. So it's going to only be like writing to 4 drives, but it's going to give you the most performance and the most flexibility. But as Jim said, if you have something very special that you want to keep separate for performance reasons, maybe you would do that. But maybe that is 2 of the drives make a mirror for your database and the other 6 make the 3 mirrors for all the other bulk storage.
That is usually the way that you would do that. And I do also want to mention, even though I'm the one who brought that possibility up, and that is something that I've done in production from time to time, if you're not sure, you almost certainly don't need to bother doing that and shouldn't bother doing that because you'll just be unnecessarily complicating your life. If you know for a fact you have a very latency sensitive application that needs to be as close to real time as possible, it makes sense to segregate your pool that way so that you don't have, conflicts coming from other storage tasks. But if you're just like, well, I have some database stuff and some file sharing stuff for, my network of 5 or 6 people at the house, no, you do not need to segregate your storage.
Yeah, you'll get a lot more out of putting it all together and being able to manage it, like you said. And as you mentioned, being able to upgrade a pair at a time.
Right, well, we'd better get out of here then. You may have noticed that we managed to avoid AI completely in this episode. Let us know if you think that's a good thing. show@2.5admins.com.
And if you'd like us to keep doing that, we need more feedback and questions. So send in your feedback about just anything you'd like us to talk about or get an opinion on, or take advantage of our free consulting and ask your questions.
For my part, I really enjoy the feedback, and it's a nice break from the news, which tends to be gloom and doom these days, even when it's not AI.
In the meantime, then, you can find me at joerest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And alanju.com for me.
We'll see you next week.